The Epic of Gilgamesh and the Flood Myth. In the 4th millennium BC, the Mesopotamians in modern-day Iraq created the first civilization, with the first large cities, the first large-scale central administration and the first writing system. At first, they wrote merely to keep administrative and economic records, but in time their script became sophisticated enough for literature. Around 1800 BC, they produced the first masterpiece of literature, known as the Epic of Gilgamesh. The story begins with upbeat boyish adventures of the partly divine King Gilgamesh and his half-beast best friend Enkidu. But the narrative changes in tone halfway through, as it turns out that the two men have, unbeknownst to them, angered the gods by killing their guardian monsters. As a result, Enkidu died, which filled Gilgamesh with heart-wrenching grief and causes him to fear his own mortality. Out of desperation, he journeyed underneath the earth to the Garden of the Gods in search for answers. There he found a man named Utnapishtim, who was told by God to build an ark to survive a great flood. When the story was rediscovered in the 19th century, it was sensational news. The story of Noah had turned up in a text about 1,000 years older than the biblical version. And, as we shall see, the similarities between these stories are stunning. Just like Noah, Utnapishtim also brought pairs of all animals on board, sent out birds in search of land, and also performed a sacrifice after the ark had stranded. For more on this story, join me for today's lecture. Let's start. Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence, and enlightenment. We'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface-level understanding you get on other channels. Go check it out for yourself. Let's start. Let's start with some background story. At first glance, King Gilgamesh seemed to be a purely fictional character, but his name was later discovered alongside the names of known historical kings. So there is a possibility that he originally was a real king, yet his life soon turned into legend. Already in the Sumerian king list, which is depicted on this beautiful cuboid pillar, and the oldest version of it is dated to about 2100 BC, it is claimed that Gilgamesh ruled for 126 years, and that his father was a Lilu or a phantom. And in a number of short stories from around the same time, we read that he was already killing monsters and that he was considered partly divine. Two of these short stories, Bilgamesh, as he was then called, and Huwawa, and also Bilgamesh and the Bowl of Heaven, later became major chunks of the Epic of Gilgamesh, as we shall see. There's also a short story called The Death of Gilgamesh, which did not end up in the epic. Here we read that he was the mortal son of a goddess, and that he became the chief of the shades, that is, of the dead, in the underworld. Now we turn to the main text. Two major versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh exist. The oldest version, called the Old Babylonian version, dates to about the 18th century BC, and it starts with the line, surpassing all other kings. Only a part of this version has been reconstructed using various damaged tablets. The second version is called the Standard Babylonian version, and it dates to between the 13th and 11th centuries BC. And it was written by the scribe priest named Sinlekiomini. And this version starts with the haunting words, "He who saw the deep," referring to the underground domain of the groundwater god Enki. Interestingly, in the time span between both versions, the Mesopotamians managed to better verbalize their subjective experience. While the earlier version is told in terms of actions alone, in the newer version we get a peek into the minds of these characters as well. For instance, we now read that sorrow resides in the heart of Gilgamesh. And some characters now even have an internal dialogue. That is, they talk with themselves. For example, the character Siduri is described as, quote, talking to herself, taking counsel in her own heart. Now, let's turn to the actual story. The standard Babylonian version starts with the following memorable lines. He who saw the deep, the country's foundation, he who was wise in all matters. This was the man to whom all things were known. This was the king who knew the countries of the world. He was wise, he saw mysteries and knew secret things. And he brought us a tale of the days before the flood. He went on a long journey, was weary, worn out with labor, and returning he rested, and engraved on a stone the whole story. What a beginning! In the epic, Gilgamesh is described as the son of the half-god Lugalbanda and the goddess Ninsun, which made Gilgamesh, quote, 2/3 god and 1/3 man. And please don't do the math on this, because it doesn't make sense. But you'll get the gist. Gilgamesh's divine nature made him supernaturally strong and handsome, and it also gave him a deal of kuzbu, or sexual charisma. As king of Uruk, the most advanced city of the world in his lifetime, Gilgamesh kept his people safe and embarked on ambitious building programs, which included building the famous city walls of Uruk and also the Temple of Anu. The text is filled with pride for the tremendous architectural achievements of the city, which were at the time unparalleled in history. We read, "In Uruk he built walls, a great rampart, and the temple of blessed Iana, meaning house of heaven, for the god of the firmament Anu and for Ishtar, the goddess of love. Look at it still today. Feel the pride here. The outer wall where the cornice runs, it shines with the brilliance of copper, and the inner wall, it has no equal. Touch the threshold, it is ancient. Approach the temple, the dwelling of Ishtar, Our Lady of Love and War, the like of which no latter-day king, no man alive can equal. Climb upon the walls of Uruk, walk along it, I say, regard the foundation terrace, and examine the masonry. Is it not burnt brick and good? Burnt brick being their building material. The 7 sages, or the Apkallu, the half fish, half man, laid its foundations." But Gilgamesh also had a weakness, his love for women. We read that he was supposed to be, quote, the shepherd to his people, but instead his lust left no virgin to her lover, neither the warrior's daughter nor the wife of the noble. On top of this, he exhausted his men, perhaps through tests of strength or through forced labor on his building projects. We're not clear because the text is damaged here. They asked the god Aruru to create a being that could rival him in strength. We read, "You made him, O Aruru, now create his equal. Let it be as like him as his own reflection, his second self, stormy heart for stormy heart. Let them contend together and leave Uruk in quiet." The goddess accepted the request and created an image in her mind, made from the stuff of Anu, the god of heaven. She then created a creature out of clay named Enkidu, and she let it fall in the wilderness. Enkidu had a rough, strong build, was covered with hair, and knew nothing of mankind or of cultivated land. We read that he ate grass in the hills with the gazelle and lurked with the wild beasts at the waterholes. He was reared on the milk of wild animals and regularly saved his animal friends from traps set by the hunters of Uruk. So, in many ways, he was the complete opposite to the sophisticated Gilgamesh. Then, one day, a hunter spotted Enkidu in the woods. Back home, the hunter told his father of a man who was, quote, the strongest in the world. He is like an immortal from heaven. The father then advised the son to go to Uruk and asked Gilgamesh to send Enkidu a prostitute from the Temple of Love. We read, "Let her femininity overpower this man. He will embrace her, and then the wild beasts will reject him." And so it happened. Then, when the gazelle saw him, they bolted away. When the wild creatures saw him, they fled. Enkidu would have followed, but his body was bound, as though with a cord. His knees gave way when he started to run. His swiftness was gone. Enkidu was grown weak, for wisdom was in him, and the thoughts of man were in his heart. Then the woman named Shamhat said to him, "Come with me, I will take you to strong-walled Uruk, to the blessed temple of Ishtar and Anu. There Gilgamesh lives, who is very strong, and like a wild bull he lords it over men." Enkidu was pleased, for he longed for a comrade who would truly understand his heart. In the meantime, Gilgamesh was plagued by strange dreams. In one of them he saw a star made from the stuff of Anu, which fell from heaven. Gilgamesh then tried to lift it, but it was too heavy, even for him, which meant that he would soon find a companion that would be a true challenge to him for the first time in his life. Shamhat then gave Enkidu his first bread and wine and also clothing, making him into a man. On his way to Uruk, he heard of an upcoming marriage and also of Gilgamesh's plan to sleep with the bride before her husband. This angered Enkidu. He said, "I will go to the place where Gilgamesh lords it over the people. I will challenge him boldly, and I will cry aloud in Uruk, 'I have come to change the old order, for I am the strongest here.'" At night, when the bride was waiting for the bridegroom, Gilgamesh attempted to sneak in, but Enkidu blocked his way. They immediately grabbed hold of each other like bulls. They shattered the doorpost, and the walls shook. Gilgamesh bent his knee with his foot planted on the ground, and with a turn, Enkidu was thrown on the ground. And then immediately the fury died. Enkidu was impressed by Gilgamesh's strength, and quote, "They embraced, and their friendship was sealed." Yet, it didn't take long before Enkidu felt depressed by the inactivity of city life. When he told his friend with tears in his eyes, Gilgamesh listened to his complaint and invited Enkidu to join him on an adventure to make names for themselves. He said, "We'll go to the cedar forest and destroy the evil, for in the forest lives Humbaba, whose name is Hugeness, a ferocious giant." Enkidu resisted, for he knew the forest and its dangers. He said, "But the god Enlil has appointed Humbaba to guard the forest. When he roars, it is like the torrent of the storm. His breath is like fire, and his jaws are death itself. What man would willingly walk into that country and explore its depths? I tell you, weakness overpowers whoever goes near him. It is not an equal struggle when one fights with Humbaba. The watchman of the forest never sleeps." But Gilgamesh was not afraid. He claimed that even dying in a fight with the mighty Humbaba would be worth it, as it would give them heroic status. The people would say, "Gilgamesh has fallen in fight with the ferocious Humbaba." But Enkidu still protested and convinced Gilgamesh to at least visit the sun god Shamash and ask him for advice. And Gilgamesh did. He said to the sun god, "Because I have not yet established my name stamped on brick, as my destiny decreed, I will go to the country where the cedar is cut. I will set up my name where the names of famous men are written, and where no man's name is written, I will raise a monument to the gods. If this enterprise is not to be accomplished, then why did you move me, Shamash, with the restless desire to perform it? How can I succeed if you will not support me? If I die in that country, I will die without regrets. But if I return, I will make a glorious offering of gifts and of praise to Shamash." Shamash was moved by his speech and promised to support him by making the north wind, the whirlwind, the stone and the icy wind, the tempest and the scorching wind his allies. Gilgamesh and Enkidu then picked up great weapons and went on their way, with Enkidu in front as he knew the forest. After a long journey, they reached the cedar forest, and there Gilgamesh seized an axe and cut down a cedar. When Humbaba heard the noise, he was enraged. He cried out, "Who is it that has violated my woods and cut down my cedar?" He came out from his strong house of cedar and approached them. And when Enkidu saw the creature in the distance, he was terrified and wanted to go home. But Gilgamesh responded, "Sacrifice is not yet for me. The boat of death shall not go down. If your heart is fearful, Enkidu, throw fear away. If there is terror in it, throw away terror. Take your axe in your hand and attack. He who leaves the fight unfinished is not at peace." The monster then accused Enkidu of betrayal for siding with the city man, and he also vowed to disembowel Gilgamesh and feed his flesh to the birds. When he approached, the mountains quaked and the sky turned black, and then Gilgamesh called Shamash for help, who then heard his prayer and summoned the winds. The winds grabbed Humbaba until he was unable to move, and the monster begged for mercy. Yet Enkidu told Gilgamesh to kill him quickly before the god Enlil would find out. So Gilgamesh struck Humbaba with a thrust of his sword in his neck, and Enkidu struck a second blow, and with the third blow Gilgamesh cut off his head. The two heroes then cut down many cedars from the sacred grove, including one giant tree that Enkidu vowed to fashion into a gate for the temple of Enlil to make up for killing his guardian. Enlil, however, was not pleased. When he saw the head of Humbaba, he was enraged and cursed the two heroes. Gilgamesh and Enkidu, however, did not notice this, being far too busy celebrating their victory. They built a raft and returned home along the Euphrates River, together with the giant tree and the head of Humbaba. When Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, he washed out his long locks, cleaned his weapons and put on his royal robes. And when he also put on his crown, the goddess Ishtar, also called Inanna, lifted her eyes and looked at his beauty. She said, "Come to me, Gilgamesh, and be my bridegroom." She promised him many things. She said, "Kings will bow down before you." Yet Gilgamesh then reminded her how badly she treated her previous lover, Dumuzi, who stars in another ancient Mesopotamian myth. When Ishtar heard this, she fell into a bitter rage and went up to the high heaven to her father Anu to complain. Her father told her that Gilgamesh was right about her past behavior. However, Ishtar persisted. She said, "Father, give me the bull of heaven to destroy Gilgamesh. And if you refuse, I will break in the doors of hell and smash the bolts. I will bring up the dead to eat food like the living, and the hosts of the dead will outnumber the living." Hearing this, Anu saw no other choice but to hand over the bull to Ishtar, which she immediately unleashed on Uruk. We read, "With a snort, the bull cracks open the earth, and 100 young men fell to their deaths. And Enkidu fell, but instantly stood up. He dodged aside and leaped on the bull, and seized it by the horns. The bull of heaven foamed in his face. Gilgamesh followed the bull. He seized the thick of its tail, and he thrust his sword between the nape and the horns, and slew the bull. When they had killed the bull of heaven, they cut out its heart, and gave it to the sun god Shamash. And then we read, the brothers rested. Ishtar then cursed Gilgamesh for killing the bull, but the two heroes were not intimidated. Enkidu tore out the bull's right thigh and tossed it in her face. And Gilgamesh then called upon the smiths to plate the immense horns of the bull with lapis lazuli, and then carried the horns into his palace, hung them on a wall, and celebrated their victory. But our two heroes had been way too naive, and as a result, things were about to go terribly wrong. Enkidu had a terrifying dream in which he witnessed a meeting of the gods. In this meeting, the god Anu told Enlil, "Because they have killed the bull of heaven, and because they have killed Humbaba, who guarded the Cedar Mountain, one of them must die." Enlil chose Enkidu, for he had killed the monster Humbaba. Shamash protested, but the other gods had already made up their minds. Enkidu, in tears, told Gilgamesh about his dream. "Oh, my brother," he said, "so dear as you are to me, brother, yet they will take me from you, Never again will I see my dear brother with my eyes. And not long after, Enkidu fell ill, and we read that the suffering made him curse the gate that he made from the towering cedar tree. He said, "If I had known that this was all the good that would come of it, I would have raised the axe and split you into little pieces and set up a gate of twigs instead." And then he had another terrifying dream. The heavens roared and the earth rumbled back an answer, and between them stood I, before an awful being, the somber-faced man-bird. His face was a demonic face. His foot was a lion's foot. His hands was an eagle's talon. He fell on me, and his claws were in my hair. He held me fast, and I smothered. Then he transformed me, so that my arms became wings covered with feathers. He turned his stare towards me, and he led me away to the palace of Irkalla, the Queen of Darkness, to the house from which none who enters ever returns, down the road from which there is no coming back. Interestingly, the dream gives us a terrifying glimpse into the Mesopotamian conception of the underworld. We continue. There is the house whose people sit in darkness. Dust is their food and clay their meat. They are clothed like the birds with wings for covering. They see no light. They sit in darkness. I entered the house of dust, and I saw the kings of the earth, their crowns put away forever. Rulers and princes, all those who once wore kingly crowns and ruled the world in the days of old. And there was Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld. She held a tablet from which she read. She raised her head, she saw me and spoke, "Who has brought this one here?" And then Enkidu awoke in terror. When Gilgamesh heard about the dream, he cried. He prayed to the gods, but Enkidu's suffering only increased. For 12 days his condition worsened. Enkidu then said to Gilgamesh, "My friend, the great goddess cursed me, and I must die in shame. I shall not die like the man fallen in battle. I fear to fall, but happy is the man who falls in battle, for I must die in shame." And the next day Enkidu died. Overcome by grief, Gilgamesh spoke the following heart-wrenching words. "What is this sleep which holds you now? You are lost in the dark and cannot hear me." Gilgamesh then touched Enkidu's heart, but it did not beat, nor did Enkidu lift his eyes again. And then Gilgamesh began to rage like a lion, like a lioness robbed of her whelps. He paced round his bed, and he tore out his hair. He pulled off his splendid robes, and he flung them down. Gilgamesh could not accept what had happened, and he also refused to give up Enkidu for burial. We read that he wept for 7 days and 7 nights, quote, "until the worms fasted on Enkidu." Only then did he decide to arrange Enkidu's funeral, and he also ordered the coppersmiths, the goldsmiths, and the stoneworkers to build him a statue. But he still could not find closure. Feeling restless, he left Uruk in tears and began to wander in the wilderness. In his bitterness, he cried, "How can I rest? How can I be at peace? Despair is in my heart. What my brother is now, that shall I be when I am dead." And eventually his fear of death convinced him to go on a quest to find Utnapishtim, meaning I found my life. Both Utnapishtim and his wife were the only humans granted immortality by the gods, and Gilgamesh now wanted the same. He said, "Because I am afraid of death, I will go as best I can to find Utnapishtim, whom they call the Far Away, for he has entered the assembly of the gods." After a long journey, Gilgamesh came to Mashu, a great twin-peak mountain at the end of the world that served as the gateway for the setting of the sun. But the gate at Mashu was guided by 2 scorpion men. When Gilgamesh approached, they recognized his divine nature, and one of the scorpion men asked, "Why have you come so great a journey? For what have you traveled so far, crossing the dangerous waters? Tell me the reason of your coming." Gilgamesh then answered, "For Enkidu, I loved him dearly. Together we endured all kinds of hardships. On his account I have come, for the common lot of man has taken him. I have wept for him day and night. I would not give up his body for burial. I thought my friend would come back because of my weeping. And since he went, my life is nothing. That is why I have traveled here in search of Utnapishtim. For men say he has entered the assembly of the gods and has found everlasting life. I have a desire to question him concerning the living and the dead." One of the scorpion men then responded, "But no man has done what you have asked. No mortal man has gone into the mountain. The length of it is 12 leagues of darkness. In it there is no light, only darkness." But Gilgamesh persisted, and finally the scorpion man led him through to the path of the sun. And Gilgamesh had to be quick before the sun caught up with him, making its daily round. He reached the other side just in time, and there he found a paradise full of jewel-laden trees. It is not clear, by the way, from the story where this garden is located. Some scholars believe it is at the place where the sun rises on the other edge of the world, while I in the past always assumed it was below ground, but to be fair, without any evidence. So make of it what you wish. And there, in the garden of the gods, Gilgamesh met a woman named Siduri, who lived on the shore of a great sea. After telling his story, she responded, "You will never find that life for which you are looking. For when the gods created man, they allotted to him death, but life they retained in their own keeping." She then also told him that Utnapishtim lived on an island far away at sea, and that only the sun god Shamash was able to cross this sea, since the sea was made of the waters of death and could not be touched. But after Gilgamesh persisted, she finally admitted that the ferryman of Utnapishtim, named Urshanabi, might help him cross. He went to Urshanabi and he told Gilgamesh to cut down trees to make a boat and to cover it with bitumen, and to also create 120 large wooden poles. They then used these poles to thrust themselves forward on the raft, and due to the nature of the water, each pole could only be used once. After using up all 120 poles and also employing his clothes as a sail, they finally reached the island. There, Gilgamesh met Utnapishtim and asked him the following: "You who have entered the assembly of the gods, I wish to question you concerning the living and the dead. How shall I find the life for which I am searching? Tell me truly, how was it that you came to enter the company of the gods and to possess everlasting life?" Utnapishtim responded, "I will reveal to you a mystery. I will tell you a secret of the gods." He then told of a time when humanity had multiplied so much and were so noisy that the gods could not tolerate them anymore. As a result, the god Enlil convinced the other gods to exterminate mankind. The god Enki, however, was against the plan and warned Utnapishtim in a dream. What followed was the story that became the source material for Noah's Ark in the Old Testament. Enki said to Utnapishtim, "Tear down your house, I say, and build a boat, and then take up into the boat the seed of all living creatures." And Utnapishtim then said, "I loaded into it all that I had of gold and living things, my family, my kin, the beasts of the field, both wild and tame, and all the craftsmen. And when the evening came, the rider of the storm sent down the rain. I looked out at the weather, and it was terrible, so I boarded the boat and battened it down. And for 6 days and 6 nights the winds blew, torrent and tempest and flood overwhelmed the world. And even the gods were terrified of the flood and fled to the highest heaven. But it didn't take long for the gods to regret their decision and they then began to weep. When the seventh day dawned, the storm subsided, the sea grew calm, and the flood was stilled. I looked at the face of the world, and there was silence. All mankind was turned to clay. The surface of the sea stretched as flat as a rooftop, and then I released a dove and let her go. She flew away, but finding no resting place, she returned. Then I released a swallow, and she flew away, but finding no resting place, she also returned. And then I released a raven. She saw that the waters had retreated. She ate, she flew around, she caught, and she did not come back. Utnapishtim then reasoned that the bird must have found land, which meant that the water was retreating. Upon reaching land, he made a sacrifice to the gods, and the gods then smelled its sweet fragrance, and quote, gathered like flies over the sacrifice. And by the way, in the Bible too, God, quote, smelled the pleasing aroma of the sacrifice. And the gods now realized how much they actually needed mankind for these sacrifices. But then Enlil arrived and saw the survivors, and he became angry. But then Enki condemned Enlil for instigating the flood. And finally, Enlil gave in, and even awarded Utnapishtim and his wife with eternal life. Enlil made them kneel down on either side of him and touched their foreheads, saying, "In time past Utnapishtim was a mortal man, but henceforth he and his wife shall live in the distance at the mouth of the rivers. And thus it was that the gods took me and placed me here to live in the distance." For reasons still unclear, stories of a world-destroying flood have been found across the world, including in Greece, India, China, Scandinavia, Ireland, North America, South America, Africa, Australia, and also, of course, in the biblical account. Many hypotheses for these similarities have been proposed over the years. Perhaps since floods are just a common part of human experience, these stories just developed independently. But outside the mainstreams, some scholars also think that it might be an old memory from the end of the last ice age, when large ice sheets melted, causing a rise in sea level across the world of about 125 meters. And this sea level rise definitely occurred, but most mainstream scholars think it is still far-fetched to link this to stories that appeared at earliest some 7,000 years after this occurrence. But who knows, it is an interesting idea. But now we return to the story. Gilgamesh had listened carefully to Utnapishtim, but he still did not know how he would attain immortality for himself. Utnapishtim then asked him, "Who will assemble the gods for you, Gilgamesh, so that you too may find that life for which you are searching?" Gilgamesh again persisted, after which Utnapishtim put him to the test. He told him to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh accepted the challenge, but he quickly fell asleep. And when he woke up, he realized his weakness. "What shall I do, O Utnapishtim? Where shall I go? Already the thief in the night has hold of my limbs. Death inhabits my room. Wherever my foot rests, there I find death." And Gilgamesh finally gave up. But when he was about to leave the island, Utnapishtim's wife convinced her husband to help him out. And then he said, "I shall reveal a secret thing. It is a mystery of the gods that I am telling you. There is a plant that grows under the water. It has a prickle like a thorn, like a rose. It will wound your hands, but if you succeed in taking it, but then your hands will hold that which restores lost youth to a man." The plant grew in the Apsu, a fresh water sea under the earth, which was the domain of Enki. Gilgamesh opened a gate to the Apsu, tied heavy stones to his feet, and then let them drag him down to the bottom of the sea, and there he grabbed the plant. He then cut the heavy stones and returned to the surface. To the ferryman or shinabi he then said, "I will take this to Uruk of the strong walls. There I will give it to the old man to eat, and at last I shall eat it myself and have back all of my lost youth." But on his journey home, Gilgamesh and Uruk stopped to bathe in a well. But then something unexpected happened. Deep in the pool there was lying a serpent, and the serpent sensed the sweetness of the flower of the plant. It rose out of the water and snatched it away, and then immediately shed its skin. It became young again. Gilgamesh then wept and said, "O Uruk, was it for this that I toiled with my hands? For myself I have gained nothing. Not I, but the beast of the earth has joy of it now." But once back in Uruk, Gilgamesh showed Uruk his city, and it filled him with pride. "Uruk," he said, "climb up on the walls of Uruk, inspect its foundation terrace, and examine well the brickwork. See if it is not of burnt bricks, and did not the 7 men lay its foundations?" Referring back to the words at the start of the epic. Gilgamesh then realized the futility of his longing for immortality. Mankind should instead find happiness in its accomplishments on earth, and in the possibility of being remembered by future generations. This is all we mortal men can hope for. We read, "This too was the work of Gilgamesh, the king who knew the countries of the world. He was wise, he saw mysteries, and he knew secret things. He brought us a tale of the days before the flood. He went on a long journey, was weary, worn out with labor, and returning, engraved on a stone the whole story. The destiny was fulfilled, which the father of the gods, Enlil of the mountain, had decreed for Gilgamesh. In the underworld, the darkness will show him a light. Of mankind, all that are known, none will leave a monument for generations to come to compare with his. The heroes, the wise men, like the new moon, have their waxing and waning. But men will say, who has ever ruled with might and with power like him? As in the dark month, the month of shadows, so without him there is no light. O Gilgamesh, this was the meaning of your dream. You were given the kingship. Such was your destiny. Everlasting life was not your destiny. And because of this, do not be sad of heart. Do not be grieved or oppressed. He has given you power to bind and to loose, to be the darkness and the light of mankind. And then the epic ends with a description of Gilgamesh's death. We read, "The king has laid himself down and will not rise again. And the people lamented and made offerings to the gods. Gilgamesh, the son of Ninsun, lies in his tomb. In those days the Lord Gilgamesh departed, the son of Ninsun, the king, peerless, without an equal among men. O Gilgamesh, great is thy praise." And that was it for today. If you want to know more about Gilgamesh, Mesopotamia, or many other topics from world history, then read my book, In Search of the Sublime. You can read it completely for free on worldhistorybook.com, or you can buy a physical copy on Amazon. See you next time. Bye bye.